Bought a cabin for 25 cents, and 1 year later it's worth 10 million. Sounds too good to be true, right? But what if I told you the real story is even crazier? I thought I had everything figured out. A quiet little cabin, a fresh start, until the HOA started sending me fines for the most ridiculous things. Mailbox too tall, lawn too green, and then the real shock came. When they tried to take my cabin. You won't believe what happened next. Welcome to HOA Unit. I'm your name, and I've been living in the suburbs for longer than I'd care to admit. I've seen everything from petty HOA power trips to full-blown battles. And today, I've got a story for you that's going to blow your mind. So sit back, grab a snack, and let's dive into this crazy tale of a 25-cent cabin and the HOA that tried to take it from me. I know what you're thinking. A cabin for 25 cents? Yeah, right. It sounds like a scam or some kind of joke, but let me tell you, it wasn't a joke. It all started on a random Tuesday. I was scrolling through an old website, a site full of bargain deals and too good to be true listings. But something caught my eye. A cabin in a quiet little town for 25 cents. I almost laughed, but I clicked on it anyway. The listing was odd. It was a small cabin, barely standing, located in a place I'd never heard of. But the price? 25 cents. Not $25. 25 cents. I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake, so I called the number listed. A voice answered on the other end. Hello? Yeah. I saw the listing for the cabin. Is it still available? There was a long pause. Then the voice said, You're serious? I laughed nervously. Of course I'm serious. Is the cabin still available? Another pause. Yeah, it's available, but I'll warn you, it's not for everyone. Not for everyone? Some people have come to check it out, but, well, let's just say it's not for them. At this point, I was curious, and honestly, a little confused. What could possibly be wrong with a cabin that was practically giving itself away? I asked the guy for more details, and after a few minutes of back and forth, I arranged to see the place the next day. I drove out there, thinking it might just be some weird setup. But when I arrived, I realized this wasn't your average fixer-upper. This was something straight out of a ghost story. The cabin was old, like really old. The paint was peeling off the sides, the windows were cracked, and the roof looked like it hadn't seen a proper repair in decades. It was out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense trees and thick brush. But still, it had a charm to it. Something about it felt like home. I walked inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The place was dark, musty, but there was a feeling in the air that I couldn't shake. The seller. He was there, sitting on an old chair, watching me. He said the cabin had been in his family for years, and now he just wanted to get rid of it. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel uneasy, like he was trying to push me into buying it. But something in me told me this was a once-in-a-lifetime deal. The kind of deal you tell your grandkids about. So I asked, How much for the place? 25 cents, he said flatly. 25 cents? I repeated, almost in disbelief. Yep, but it comes with conditions. Conditions? Yeah, you'll see. I was skeptical, but 25 cents. It felt too good to pass up. Bought a cabin for 25 cents and 1 year later. It's worth 10 million. Sounds too good to be true, right? But what if I told you the real story is even crazier? I thought I had everything figured out. A quiet little cabin, a fresh start. Until the HOA started sending me fines for the most ridiculous things. Mailbox too tall, lawn too green. And then the real shock came. When they tried to take my cabin. You won't believe what happened next. Welcome to HOA Unit. I'm Adam, and I've been living in the suburbs for longer than I'd care to admit. I've seen everything from petty HOA power trips to full-blown battles, and today, I've got a story for you that's going to blow your mind. So sit back, grab a snack, and let's dive into this crazy tale of a 25-cent cabin and the HOA that tried to take it from me. I know what you're thinking. A cabin for 25 cents? Yeah, right. It sounds like a scam or some kind of joke. But let me tell you, it wasn't a joke. It all started on a random Tuesday. I was scrolling through an old website, a site full of bargain deals and too-good-to-be-true listings. But something caught my eye. A cabin in a quiet little town for 25 cents. I almost laughed, but I clicked on it anyway. The listing was odd. It was a small cabin, barely standing, located in a place I'd never heard of. But the price? 25 cents. Not $25. 25 cents. I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake, so I called the number listed. A voice answered on the other end. Hello? Yeah. I saw the listing for the cabin. Is it still available? There was a long pause. Then the voice said, You're serious? I laughed nervously. Of course I'm serious. Is the cabin still available? Another pause. Yeah, it's available. But I'll warn you, it's not for everyone. Not for everyone. Some people have come to check it out, but, well, let's just say it's not for them. At this point, I was curious, and honestly, a little confused. What could possibly be wrong with a cabin that was practically giving itself away? I asked the guy for more details, and after a few minutes of back and forth, I arranged to see the place the next day. I drove out there thinking it might just be some weird setup. But when I arrived, I realized this wasn't your average fixer-upper. This was something straight out of a ghost story. The cabin was old, like really old. The paint was peeling off the sides, the windows were cracked, and the roof looked like it hadn't seen a proper repair in decades. It was out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense trees and thick brush. But still, it had a charm to it. Something about it felt like home. I walked inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The place was dark, musty, but there was a feeling in the air that I couldn't shake. The seller, he was there, sitting on an old chair, watching me. He said the cabin had been in his family for years, and now he just wanted to get rid of it. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel uneasy, like he was trying to push me into buying it. But something in me told me this was a once-in-a-lifetime deal, the kind of deal you tell your grandkids about. So I asked, how much for the place? 25 cents, he said flatly. 25 cents? I repeated, almost in disbelief. Yep, but it comes with conditions. Conditions? Yeah, you'll see. I was skeptical, but 25 cents. It felt too good to pass up. I asked him to explain the conditions, and he told me that I had to take care of the cabin. Just keep it standing, he said. Don't let it fall apart. It seemed easy enough. I shook his hand, and we agreed to the deal. I paid him the 25 cents. Yes, 25 cents. And just like that, I was the proud owner of a rundown cabin. I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking, what's the catch? What's wrong with this place? But when I drove away, I felt like I was on top of the world, like I had found the hidden treasure everyone else overlooked. I went back home, took a deep breath, and started making plans to fix it up. But little did I know, the real story was just beginning. It wasn't until a few months later that things took a dark turn. I started noticing strange things. For one, there was always someone watching the cabin. At first, I thought it was just curious neighbors, but no, there was something more to it. A few weeks after I bought the cabin, I started getting letters from the Homeowners Association, HOA. I didn't think much of it at first. They were probably just sending me some welcome packets, or maybe rules about lawn care. But when I opened the first letter, I froze. It wasn't a welcome letter. It was a warning. Apparently the cabin was in violation of several HOA rules I hadn't even heard of. The letter demanded that I immediately fix the property or face fines. The first thing they pointed out was the mailbox. It was too tall. I laughed. A mailbox? Too tall? But then they started listing more things. The grass had grown a little long. The paint was peeling, obviously. The trees were overgrown. It was like they had nothing better to do than find every little thing wrong with my cabin. I figured it was just the usual HOA nonsense. But then the letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. At first I tried to ignore it, but it got worse. I started getting phone calls, emails, letters in the mail. It was like they were watching my every move. And then came the biggest surprise of all. The HOA started claiming ownership of my cabin. How could they do that? Was this some kind of joke? I was in shock. I thought the HOA was just a group of neighbors keeping things in line, but no. They were trying to take everything I had. They said I was in violation of their rules, and they demanded the property back. It didn't make any sense. I'd bought the cabin fair and square, but the HOA, they weren't backing down. So now, I had to figure out what to do. Was this some twisted power play? Or was there more to this story than I could ever imagine? Why would the HOA be so obsessed with a cabin that cost 25 cents? And what would they do next? The next few days were strange, to say the least. The letters from the HOA kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. It wasn't just about my mailbox anymore. Now they were telling me that my grass was unacceptably overgrown, and the trees, they had to be trimmed, according to their exact specifications. They even had the audacity to suggest that I repaint the entire cabin, even though it was already a faded wreck. I was getting frustrated, but I thought, whatever, it's just some petty stuff. They can't force me to do this. So I ignored them. But then one day, as I was heading to my car, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A man in a dark suit was standing on the edge of my property, staring at the cabin. He looked like he was inspecting it, taking notes. His eyes kept darting from the house to the trees, to the lawn, and back to the house. I didn't know who he was, but he definitely wasn't one of my neighbors. I walked up to him, feeling my pulse quicken. "Can I help you?" He turned and gave me a cold stare, like he wasn't sure if he should speak to me or not. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally said, "You're in violation of the HOA's guidelines." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Excuse me?" "This property is being monitored, and I'm the one who's responsible for making sure it's up to standard." I had no idea who this guy was or why he was here, but my instincts told me something was very wrong. He wasn't just some random inspector. This guy was sent by the HOA, and I was starting to feel like I was in way over my head. "I'll make sure everything is up to code," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I'm doing what I can." He looked at me like I was an inconvenience. "We'll be watching. If you don't comply, you'll face legal action. Just remember, the HOA owns this neighborhood, and that includes your cabin." I could feel my blood boiling, but I didn't want to make a scene. He turned and walked away without another word. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just about rules. It wasn't about lawn care or mailbox height. The HOA wasn't just being a nuisance. They were trying to take control. They were coming after me, and I had no idea why. I spent the next few days thinking about what he said and what he didn't say. They owned the neighborhood? Since when? How is that even possible? I thought the HOA was just a group of neighbors looking out for each other, but this felt different, much darker. As I stood there, staring at the cabin that had once seemed like a dream come true, I began to question everything. Was there more to this place than I realized? Was the seller hiding something from me? I needed answers, so I did what anyone in my situation would do. I started investigating. I spent hours on the phone, digging through online forums, searching for any mention of my new town and the HOA. I had to know more about them, about the rules, about the history, about how they could possibly own the neighborhood. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a forum thread from an old member who was scheduled to live in the area. According to them, this town wasn't like other suburban places. The HOA here wasn't just a bunch of neighbors enforcing silly rules about lawn care. No, this HOA had power, real power. Apparently, the HOA had been involved in some shady dealings for years, buying up properties at dirt cheap prices, taking control of the land, and forcing people out who didn't play by their rules. Some people said the HOA used to be more of a community service group, but over the years, it had evolved into something much darker, much more controlling. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart racing. The pieces were starting to come together. My 25-cent cabin, my little dream, had become a pawn in their twisted game. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I didn't care how powerful they were. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. I decided to pay a visit to the local records office. I needed to see the property deeds, the land contracts, anything that might give me more information about how the HOA had gained control over the land. When I arrived at the office, I could feel the eyes of the staff on me. It was like they knew why I was there, like they were waiting for me to ask the wrong questions. I found the right file with relative ease, but as I flipped through it, something didn't add up. There was one particular clause that kept showing up in all the property records, hidden among the legal jargon. The clause stated that the HOA had the first right of refusal on any property in the neighborhood, meaning that if any house was sold, the HOA had the right to buy it first. And they didn't have to pay market value for it. They could take it for whatever price they wanted. I stared at the paper, trying to make sense of it. That didn't sound right. How could they do that? How could the HOA have so much power? That's when I heard a soft cough from behind me. I turned around, startled. It was the man in the dark suit, the one who had been inspecting my cabin. He was standing in the doorway, his cold eyes fixed on me. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice low. "But you won't find them here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this guy watching me? Had he been following me this whole time? Before I could respond, he smiled, and it was the kind of smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Don't think you can win this fight. The HOA always wins," he said, before turning and walking out the door. I stood there, frozen, with the weight of his words hanging over me. The HOA always wins. I wasn't ready to give up, but I was starting to wonder. How far would they go to get what they wanted? What was their ultimate goal? Why were they so determined to take my cabin from me? I couldn't stop thinking about what that man in the dark suit said. The HOA always wins. His words echoed in my mind like a warning. But to be honest, I wasn't about to let some shady organization take my property. I mean, I had done everything right? I followed their rules. I paid the ridiculous 25 cents, and I was just trying to make the cabin my own. But clearly, that wasn't enough for them. There was something else going on. Something I hadn't yet figured out. I spent the next couple of days gathering everything I could. Every document, every letter from the HOA, every little piece of evidence. I even started talking to some of my neighbors. Some were friendly, others not so much. But one guy, Dave, who lived a few houses down, seemed like he knew a thing or two about the HOA. I saw him standing in his yard one afternoon, trimming his bushes with an almost exaggerated care. I figured this was my chance to ask him a few questions. So I walked over, trying to act casual, like I wasn't about to stir up a hornet's nest. "Hey, Dave, how's it going?" He looked up, nodded, and said, "Same old, same old." I smiled and asked, "I've been getting these letters from the HOA. You ever had any issues with them?" His expression changed instantly. He stopped trimming the bush and set his shears down with a deliberate motion. "Don't talk to me about the HOA," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously around. "Why? What happened?" Dave hesitated for a moment, then looked me dead in the eye. "You want to know the truth?" "Of course." He glanced over his shoulder again, lowering his voice as if someone might be listening. "They don't just control the neighborhood. They own it." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean they own it?" Dave took a deep breath and began to explain. "It's a racket. They've been buying up properties for years. Not just the cheap ones. They buy everything. They've got a deal with the town, you know. It's like they've got this invisible hand pulling all the strings." I shook my head, trying to digest this. "So what? They just buy up properties and take control of them?" "Pretty much," he said. "And if you fight them, they make your life miserable. Fines, threats, they'll even send people to mess with your place. They've done it to me and a lot of others." I couldn't believe it. This wasn't just a neighborhood HOA. It was a corporate empire hiding behind the facade of community rules. But it didn't stop there. "There's one guy," Dave continued, his voice lowering even further. "The president of the HOA. His name's Arthur Hawke. He's the one who runs everything. Everyone who's ever fought him, they either left or what?" I asked, my curiosity burning. "Or they disappeared," Dave said, his voice barely a whisper. I stared at him in disbelief. "Disappeared? What does that mean?" "I'm telling you," Dave said, his eyes wide. "Hawke is bad news. He doesn't care who you are, what you've done. You cross him, and it's over. He'll ruin you." I felt my heart race. This was bigger than I thought. Not only was the HOA trying to take my cabin, but it seemed like they were doing the same thing to others. Quietly, behind the scenes. It was a well-oiled machine, and I was just a tiny cog in it. I left Dave's yard that afternoon with more questions than answers. I had to figure out who Arthur Hawke was. What did he want? Why was he so obsessed with controlling the neighborhood? But I had no idea just how far this rabbit hole would go. A few days later, I got another letter. But this one was different. It wasn't just a warning about my lawn or my mailbox. This one was a threat. It said that if I didn't surrender the cabin to the HOA within the next 72 hours, they would take legal action, and I would never see my property again. I was furious. I had done nothing wrong, and they were trying to scare me into giving up my cabin. I grabbed the letter, crumpled it in my hand, and stormed outside. But when I reached the driveway, there was something I didn't expect. A black car was parked across the street, and two men were standing outside of it. They were wearing dark suits, just like the guy I had seen at the records office. They were watching my cabin. I didn't know who they were, but they didn't look like anyone who belonged in a small town. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Something was happening, something big, and I had no idea what it was. I quickly turned and went back inside. I had to figure out what was going on, and why they were trying so hard to scare me. I grabbed my phone and called a lawyer. I didn't know what else to do. But when the lawyer answered, he didn't sound like he was going to help me. "Mr. Dawson, I've heard about your situation, and frankly, I don't think you can win this." "What do you mean?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. The HOA is too powerful. They've got connections. They've got money. You don't stand a chance against them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own lawyer was telling me to give up. I thought about everything Dave had said, about the HOA's power, about Arthur Hawke. I realized he was right. I was up against something much bigger than myself. But the question was, what could I do? Should I just give in and let them take my cabin? Or was there a way to fight back? The lawyer's words lingered in my mind long after the call ended. "You don't stand a chance against them," he had said. That phrase kept echoing in my head like a haunting mantra. I couldn't shake it. Could he really be right? Was I really just a pawn in some game I had no control over? I sat there, staring at the walls of my cabin, trying to make sense of everything. The lawn violations, the fines, the threats from the HOA, the men in dark suits who seemed to be watching my every move. What was the endgame? What did they want? I paced around the cabin, my mind racing with ideas. I had no intention of just rolling over. This was my home now, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me, especially not some faceless HOA run by a man named Arthur Hawke, who seemed to have more power than any one person should. I spent the rest of the evening gathering everything I could about the HOA, documents, letters, anything that might give me leverage. I had to find some way to fight back. But as I sifted through piles of paperwork, one thing became crystal clear. They were good at what they did. Too good. The rules were a tangled mess of legal jargon. The more I read, the more it felt like the HOA had thought of everything, leaving no loopholes. The cabins, the properties, the neighborhood itself, it all seemed to revolve around their iron grip. It was as if the HOA was controlling not just the houses, but the very lives of the people who lived here. I needed answers, real answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting here in my cabin and hoping things would just work out. The next morning, I decided to pay Arthur Hawke a visit. I had no idea what to expect, but I had to confront him. If he was the mastermind behind this whole operation, then maybe, just maybe, I could get to the truth. I drove to the HOA office, which was a small building tucked away at the edge of town. It looked unassuming from the outside, but I had a feeling that what went on inside was anything but ordinary. I parked my car and took a deep breath before walking inside. The door creaked open, and the smell of old paper and wood hit me. The front desk was empty, but I could hear voices coming from the back. I didn't waste any time. I walked straight through the narrow hallway toward the sound of the voices. As I neared the back office, I saw him, Arthur Hawke. He was standing behind a large wooden desk, his back to me, looking at a file. He looked different from what I expected, not what I had imagined. A power-hungry maniac, but calm, calculated, almost like he was just doing his job. When he heard the door open, he turned slowly, an almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Well, well, if it isn't Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge. "I've been expecting you." I froze. How did he know I was coming? "Sit down." He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "We need to talk." I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything I'd been through. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this has gone too far," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not giving up my cabin. You can't just take it." Arthur didn't flinch. He simply watched me, his eyes dark and calculating. "It's not about you, Mr. Dawson. It's never been about you." I was confused. "What do you mean?" "This neighborhood," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "It's not what it seems. What you think is a neighborhood is really just an investment, a property, a piece of land. And the HOA? Well, we control it all. The cabins, the roads, the trees, the lawns, even the people who live here. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. And now, you're a part of it, whether you like it or not. I clenched my fists, the anger rising in my chest. I don't care about your investment. This is my home, and I won't let you take it. Arthur's smile widened just a little, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a predator's smile. You don't understand. You're not in control here. You never have been. The HOA runs everything, Mr. Dawson. We're the ones who decide who stays and who goes. I stared at him, my mind racing. What was he saying? This wasn't about a simple neighborhood association anymore. This was about power, absolute control. Why me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are you after me? Arthur chuckled softly, the sound almost eerie in the quiet of the office. It's not personal, Mr. Dawson. You just happened to be in the way. A simple mistake, really. You see, we've been slowly buying up properties in this area for years. We need them to build something bigger, something better. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't just controlling the neighborhood. They were planning something on a much larger scale, and I was standing in the way. I won't let you do this, I said, my voice firm. Arthur's smile faded. You don't have a choice. I could feel the weight of his words. He was right. The HOA had the power. They had the connections. I was just one person. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them win. I couldn't. I stood up, my resolve solidifying. I'll fight you. I'll do whatever it takes. Arthur raised an eyebrow. I'd be careful if I were you, Mr. Dawson. This is a battle you won't win. I didn't say anything. I turned and walked out of the office, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I stepped into the daylight, something shifted. I had no idea what I was up against, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go, not without a fight. I didn't care how powerful the HOA was. I didn't care who Arthur Hawke thought he was. I was going to expose them, and I was going to make sure they didn't get away with it. But here's the real question. What do you think? Am I making a mistake going up against the HOA? Or do you think I have a real chance of taking them down? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I left Arthur Hawke's office with a storm of thoughts swirling in my head. I had just stepped into a world that was darker than I could have ever imagined. The HOA wasn't just an annoying group of nosy neighbors. They were a force, a powerful, manipulative, and dangerous force. As I walked back to my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something I had no control over. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about my cabin. This was about power, and now I was in the middle of it. I had made up my mind. I couldn't just walk away and let them take everything from me, but where could I even start? How do you fight something like the HOA? They controlled everything: property, people, rules. Even the law seemed to bend in their favor. I knew I had to find a way to break through their hold. I had to make them see me as more than just another victim. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through everything I had, every letter from the HOA, every document I had found, even the vague threats Arthur Hawke had thrown at me. I had to dig deeper. I started searching for any clues, anything that could give me an advantage over them. And then I found it. Tucked away in the corner of a file, buried under legalese, was something that caught my eye. A mention of a special clause, a clause that gave the HOA even more control than I had imagined. It wasn't just about property rights anymore, it was about leverage. This clause, hidden in the fine print, gave the HOA the right to force homeowners into specific contracts. These weren't just about fines or threats, they were binding agreements, ones that could erase someone's ability to fight back. No one had ever challenged it before. No one had ever bothered to read the fine print. But I had, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I knew then that if I wanted to have any chance of stopping them, I needed help. I wasn't going to take on an entire organization on my own. I needed to find someone who knew how to fight the system, someone who could help me break the hold the HOA had over me. I made a call the next morning to a private investigator. His name was Vince. He had a reputation for digging up dirt on people who thought they were untouchable. I had heard about him through a friend of a friend, and while I didn't know much about him, I knew he was the kind of person who wouldn't back down from a fight. Vince arrived at my cabin later that day. He looked like someone who had seen it all. Tough, no nonsense, with a quiet confidence that made you believe he could take on the world and win. He stepped out of his car and surveyed the property, his eyes scanning every inch of the cabin, every tree, every detail that the HOA had been obsessing over. "So, what's the deal?" Vince asked, his arms crossed as he leaned against his car. "You're not the first person to run into trouble with an HOA, but something tells me this isn't just a typical case." I told him everything, about the cabin, the HOA's constant interference, the strange threats, and the bizarre clause I had found. Vince listened intently, his expression never changing. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I'll tell you one thing," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This HOA isn't just about enforcing rules. They've got something going on behind the scenes, something bigger than just petty fines." I could feel my pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" I asked. Vince paused, taking a long look at the cabin before turning to me. "They've been buying up properties for years, right? But it's not just about controlling the land, it's about controlling the people who live here. They want power, they want influence, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words. "Then what can we do?" I asked. "How do we stop them?" Vince didn't answer right away. He looked around the property again, then glanced back at me. "I've got some digging to do," he said. "But if we want to take them down, we need to expose what they've been hiding. The law's on their side right now, but if we find the right leverage, if we dig up the right dirt, it'll be our turn to play the game." I nodded. That was the answer I needed. We weren't just going to fight back. We were going to make them regret ever messing with me. Vince got to work right away. He spent the next few days digging into the HOA's past, talking to people who had lived here long before I moved in. The more he uncovered, the more it became clear. The HOA's reach was far bigger than anyone realized. They weren't just a neighborhood association. They were a full-fledged business empire with deep ties to local government, real estate, and even law enforcement. It wasn't long before Vince found something that made my stomach churn. The HOA had been involved in several illegal land deals, funneling money through shell companies and laundering it through untraceable accounts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The HOA wasn't just controlling the neighborhood. They were manipulating the very system that was supposed to protect people like me. But with this new information, we had a weapon. The question now was, what were we going to do with it? I had no intention of letting them get away with this. It wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about justice, and it was time to fight back. But I had to wonder, how far would the HOA go to protect their secrets? Would they stop at nothing to keep their empire intact? And what would they do when they found out that someone was on to them? I had no idea what I was getting into when I decided to go up against the HOA. At first it seemed like a simple battle over property lines, fines, and a couple of ridiculous rules. But now it was something much bigger. I wasn't just fighting for my cabin anymore. I was fighting against a shadowy empire, an empire that was willing to do anything to protect its secrets. The information Vince had uncovered was like a ticking time bomb. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance. They were operating outside the law, laundering money through fake deals, and using their control over the neighborhood to cover it all up. But I still didn't know exactly who I was up against. Who was really pulling the strings? Arthur Hawke? Or someone much more powerful? I spent sleepless nights thinking about it. The threat had escalated from just my cabin to something much darker. If the HOA could get away with this kind of manipulation, what else were they capable of? What kind of people were behind this? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Vince and I decided to take a more aggressive approach. We would gather enough evidence to expose the HOA and take them down for good. But as we dug deeper, we uncovered something that made my blood run cold. The more we investigated, the more I realized that the HOA wasn't just focused on controlling property. They were manipulating the very fabric of this town. They had connections in local government, the police force, and even the courts. I started to see that this wasn't just a battle over land anymore. It was a battle for control of the entire town. And I was standing in the way. One evening, as I was going through some old documents, I found something that made my heart race. It was a list of properties that had been sold under mysterious circumstances, properties that had been quietly taken by the HOA. The names of the previous owners were listed, but they were crossed out. Underneath, there was a note: "Transfer complete, no questions asked." I didn't know what to make of it at first, but the more I looked, the clearer it became. These were not legitimate transactions. The HOA wasn't just buying up properties, they were taking them by force, and they were doing it without anyone noticing. Vince H. had been busy too. He had dug into the local records and found evidence of dozens of deals that had been arranged by the HOA. Deals where the properties were sold for pennies on the dollar, and in some cases outright stolen. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was a full-fledged conspiracy, and I had stumbled right into the heart of it. We weren't just fighting for my property, we were fighting for the future of this entire town. The HOA was systematically taking control of every piece of land, and anyone who stood in their way was crushed. But I wasn't about to back down. We had the evidence now. We had the proof that the HOA was operating illegally. I couldn't keep this to myself. I knew I had to go public, to expose everything I had found. Vince and I decided to take the information to the local news station. It was risky, but it was the only way to get the truth out. We met with a reporter, someone we trusted, and showed her everything we had uncovered. She was shocked. No one had any idea how deep the HOA's corruption ran. It took hours of convincing, but in the end, she agreed to help us expose the truth. The next few days were a blur. I kept waiting for the HOA to come after me, for them to try to intimidate me into silence. But they didn't, at least not right away. The news story aired the following week. The public was shocked by what we had uncovered. The HOA's corrupt dealings, their illegal land grabs, and their connections to local officials were exposed for all to see. People were outraged. Finally, the truth was out in the open, and the people of the town were waking up to what had been happening right under their noses. But just when I thought I might have a chance at winning, the HOA made its move. It wasn't the angry letters, the fines, or the threats anymore. No, this time, it was something far more sinister. One evening, as I was sitting in my cabin, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before opening it. When I did, my heart sank. There, standing on my doorstep, was the man I had seen before, the one in the dark suit, and this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, their faces cold and unreadable. "Mr. Dawson," the man in the suit said, his voice low and threatening. "You've made a big mistake." I felt my stomach drop. I knew this was coming. But it didn't make it any easier. What were they going to do? Were they going to try to scare me? Or were they planning something worse? Before I could respond, one of the men behind him stepped forward. He handed me a thick envelope, the kind you only get when things are about to get real serious. I took it, my hands shaking, and opened it. Inside was a court order. The HOA was suing me. They were trying to take my cabin from me, legally. This wasn't just about fines or rules anymore. This was a battle for my home. They had finally decided to make their move, and it wasn't going to be pretty. I had a decision to make. Was I going to back down, or was I going to fight back with everything I had? The envelope was still in my hands, the weight of it pressing down on me like 1,000 pounds. I stared at the court order, trying to make sense of what I was reading. This wasn't just a typical legal maneuver. This was personal. The HOA wasn't playing around anymore. They wanted to take my cabin, and they had the law on their side. As the man in the dark suit stood there, his eyes cold and unblinking, I knew they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. "Mr. Dawson," the man said, his voice a mixture of calm and threat. "This doesn't have to be hard. You can leave now, and we'll forget all of this ever happened. But if you fight us, we'll make sure you lose everything. Your cabin, your savings, your reputation, all of it." I clenched my fists, feeling the fire rising in my chest. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about my life, about standing up for what was right. "You're not taking my home," I said, my voice steady, but filled with defiance. The man smirked, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see about that." With that, they turned and walked off, leaving me standing in my doorway, holding the court order like a battle flag. I didn't know how, but I was going to fight this. I wasn't going to let them push me around. I called Vince immediately. "We need to escalate this. The HOA's not backing down. They're suing me for everything I have." Vince's voice was sharp. "I knew they'd go this route. Don't worry, I've got your back. We'll hit them where it hurts." That's when I realized this fight wasn't just about winning my cabin back. This was about exposing everything. The corruption, the lies, the manipulation. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. I spent the next few days getting ready for battle. Vince and I started pulling together every piece of evidence we had, documents, recordings, photos of the shady deals we had uncovered. But as we dug deeper, we found something that made my stomach turn. It wasn't just the HOA's illegal land grabs or their control over the town. There was something bigger at play, something I hadn't anticipated. Arthur Hawke, the president of the HOA, wasn't just some power-hungry man looking to expand his empire. He was tied to something far more dangerous. Vince found records showing that Hawke had connections to several prominent business figures, as well as shady dealings with politicians. This wasn't just about a neighborhood anymore. This was about a network of power, stretching far beyond what I could have imagined. And I had stumbled right into its crosshairs. But I wasn't backing down. No matter how deep this rabbit hole went, I was in it for the long haul. Vince and I knew we had to expose everything, but we also had to be smart. We couldn't just run headfirst into a legal battle. We needed a strategy, and we needed to play our cards carefully. We decided to take the next step, go public. We started reaching out to journalists, news outlets, anyone who would listen. It wasn't enough to just fight them in court. We needed to bring this fight to the people. The first breakthrough came when we managed to get an interview with a local news anchor. He had been hearing whispers about the HOA's activities, but no one had ever dared to speak up. Now we had the proof. We showed him everything: the illegal land deals, the manipulation, the threats. He was stunned, but he was on our side. The night the interview aired, everything changed. The response was overwhelming. The public was furious. For the first time, people in the town were waking up to the truth. They couldn't believe what the HOA had been doing right under their noses. People were calling in, asking how they could help, demanding justice. But the HOA wasn't taking this lying down. Within hours, I received another legal notice. This time, they were trying to freeze my assets. They were pulling out all the stops to crush me. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me into submission. If they thought they could silence me, they were gravely mistaken. Then came the biggest shock of all. As I was preparing for the next round of legal battles, I got a call from an anonymous source. They told me something that stopped me dead in my tracks. "Arthur Hawke isn't just the president of the HOA," the voice said. "He's part of a much bigger organization. You have no idea what you're really up against." Before I could ask more questions, the line went dead. I couldn't believe it. What organization? Who was pulling the strings behind Hawke? Was this really just about property, or was there something much darker going on? And what did that anonymous source know? I spent the next few days trying to track down any leads. I reached out to anyone I could think of who might know more about Arthur Hawke's past, about the group he was tied to. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. People started backing away, warning me to stop. They didn't want to get involved. They were afraid. But I wasn't afraid. If anything, I was more determined than ever. The battle was far from over, but I could feel it. I was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. I wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when I was so close to exposing everything. And then, just when I thought I had a handle on things, I got another surprise. A letter from Arthur Hawke himself. It was a challenge. He wanted to meet. No lawyers, no cameras, just the two of us. He claimed he wanted to talk things out. I knew this was a trap. He didn't want to negotiate. He wanted to intimidate me. But I had come this far. I wasn't about to back down now. So I agreed to the meeting. But I wasn't going alone. I had to wonder, was this the moment I had been waiting for? Would this finally be my chance to face Hawke and expose everything? Or was this just another one of his tricks to shut me up for good? Do you think this is the right move? Should I face Hawke alone, or should I play it safe and back off? What would you do in my shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.